I waited 3 hours beside a birthday cake before realizing my son had remembered his wife's new SUV more clearly than my 65th birthday. I kept staring at the candles even after the flames burned low enough to melt wax across the white frosting. The cake had come from Costco that morning. Chocolate, with buttercream roses around the edges, because Ryan used to love those when he was a little boy. I had stood in front of the bakery case for nearly 40 minutes, wondering if buying the larger cake was foolish for such a small gathering. But mothers hold on to hope longer than they should. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. That evening, my dining room smelled like roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, and the apple pie cooling near the kitchen window. Everything had been timed carefully. The chicken rested under foil. The candles waited beside the plates. Even the cloth napkins had been ironed. At 65, you learn that details matter because sometimes details are the only proof that someone cared enough to prepare. Outside, November rain tapped softly against the windows of my little suburban Illinois home. The streetlights reflected across the wet pavement, turning the neighborhood gold and blurry. Families up and down the block were settling in for dinner while I kept glancing at my phone every few minutes. At 5:12 p.m., Ryan texted. Running behind. Might be a little late. I smiled when I saw it. That was still hope. At 6:03 p.m., I reheated the potatoes. At 6:47 p.m., I turned the oven down again so the chicken would not dry out. At 7:15 p.m., I stopped pretending they were almost there. Still, every time headlights passed across the front window, my body reacted before my mind could stop it. I would straighten in my chair, smooth my sweater, glance toward the hallway mirror. Once, I heard tires slow outside the house. My heart lifted. I stood too quickly, one hand pressing against the table for balance, and moved toward the living room window. Through the sheer curtain, I saw a delivery van stop in front of the Johnsons' house next door. Not Ryan. Just a man carrying a cardboard box through the rain. I stood there a moment longer than necessary, embarrassed even though nobody had seen me. Vanessa had not texted once. That part hurt more than I wanted to admit. My daughter-in-law never forgot anything involving herself. She remembered sales at Nordstrom. She remembered restaurant reservations. She remembered which skincare serum came from which boutique website. But somehow, my birthday had slipped quietly off her calendar like dust swept under a rug. At the dining table, there were 4 plates. 1 for me. 1 for Ryan. 1 for Vanessa. And 1 small plate for Liam, my grandson, because he liked eating cake before grown-ups finished talking. I had even placed his fork on the left side the way he preferred after deciding last summer that he was left-handed for desserts. I looked at that little plate the longest. The silence inside the house reminded me too much of the silence after my husband Walter passed 3 years ago. Back then, Ryan had stood beside me at the cemetery in his black wool coat and promised things would not change between us. "You'll never be alone, Mom," he had said. I believed him because grief makes promises sound sacred. At 8:11 p.m., my phone finally buzzed. I grabbed it too quickly, nearly knocking over my wine glass. But it was not Ryan calling. It was Facebook. Vanessa had posted new photos. My thumb hesitated over the notification before I opened it. There she stood under bright dealership lights, wearing a cream-colored coat and that polished smile she used whenever she wanted strangers to envy her life. Ryan stood beside her with one arm around her waist while she held up a giant red bow tied across the hood of a brand new black SUV. The caption read, "Best surprise ever. So grateful for a husband who spoils me." Below it were photos of champagne glasses inside the dealership lounge and another of Vanessa sitting behind the wheel, laughing while Ryan kissed her cheek. I stared at the screen so long my eyes started burning. In the background of one picture, I noticed the time displayed on the dealership wall clock. 6:42 p.m. Right around the moment I had been reheating potatoes. And checking the driveway for headlights. My chest tightened slowly. Not dramatically. Just enough to make breathing feel unfamiliar. The strange thing about heartbreak at my age is how quiet it becomes. You do not scream. You do not throw things. You simply sit there while another piece of your understanding falls apart inside you. Then I saw a comment beneath the photos. Vanessa's cousin had written, "At least someone got celebrated today." Vanessa replied with a laughing emoji. I set the phone face down on the table. For a few seconds, I could hear nothing except the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. 4 plates. 4 wine glasses. 4 cloth napkins folded carefully beside silverware that had belonged to my mother. I suddenly felt embarrassed by all of it. Embarrassed by the candles. Embarrassed by the balloons taped near the window. Embarrassed that some part of me still believed my son might choose me first, even for one evening. At 8:30 p.m., Ryan finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. Behind him, I heard muffled music and voices echoing across what sounded like a large showroom floor. "You okay?" he asked. I looked down at the untouched birthday cake. One candle had collapsed sideways into the frosting. "I'm fine," I said quietly. There was a brief silence before a woman's voice cut through the phone. "Mr. Whitmore, congratulations again on the luxury package upgrade." Ryan lowered his voice quickly. "Listen, things got crazy tonight. We'll celebrate this weekend, okay?" This weekend. Like my birthday was a dentist appointment that could simply be rescheduled. I smiled even though he could not see it. "Of course," I told him. "Drive safely." After we hung up, I carried the cake into the kitchen and placed it carefully inside the refrigerator beside a bowl of untouched salad and a pitcher of sweet tea. Then I stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. A 65-year-old woman in a blue sweater. Silver birthday balloons floating behind her. Alone in a spotless house. Waiting for people who had already chosen somewhere else to be. That night, before I turned off the dining room light, I looked once more at Liam's little plate. For reasons I could not explain, that was the thing that finally made my hands tremble. Not the SUV. Not the photos. Not even the laughing comment. It was that small empty plate. Because it told me something I was not ready to admit yet. Ryan had not only forgotten my birthday. He had started forgetting where I belonged in his life. I woke up before sunrise without needing an alarm. At my age, grief and disappointment seemed to replace sleep more efficiently than coffee ever could. The house was still dark except for the soft blue light above the stove clock reading 5:18 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table wearing my old gray robe while the coffee maker gurgled quietly behind me. The birthday balloons were still floating near the dining room ceiling. Well, most of them. One had already begun sinking toward the floor. I stared at it for a long time. Funny how quickly things start falling once the air leaves them. Outside, the neighborhood remained silent except for the distant rumble of a garbage truck somewhere down the block. My street always looked peaceful in the mornings. Identical mailboxes. Neatly trimmed lawns. American flags hanging from porches. The kind of neighborhood where people waved politely but rarely knew what happened behind each other's front doors. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and looked toward the refrigerator. The cake was still inside. Untouched. Just like everything else. Enough food to feed 6 people sat cooling behind that refrigerator door because I still cooked like a mother expecting everyone home for dinner. Around 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. Another Facebook notification. I almost ignored it. Almost. But loneliness makes people curious in ways they should not be. Vanessa had uploaded more photos overnight. This time they were sitting in a steakhouse downtown. Ryan sat beside her in a leather booth smiling while she held up a cocktail with one perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. The comments poured beneath the photos. "You deserve it. Queen energy. That SUV is gorgeous." I kept scrolling even though I knew I shouldn't. Then I Found the comment again. The one from her cousin. At least someone got celebrated yesterday. Underneath it sat Vanessa's laughing emoji. Nothing else. Just enough. The sort of cruelty that allows someone to pretend they never said anything wrong. I placed the phone face down on the table. There are moments when humiliation becomes so quiet it almost feels polite. I thought about Ryan's 10th birthday party. Walter and I barely had enough money back then. I remember clipping coupons for weeks and sewing decorations by hand because Ryan wanted a superhero theme. Walter worked overtime at the manufacturing plant just to afford the custom cake. $300. Back then, that might as well have been $3,000. But seeing our son smile felt worth every sacrifice. Mothers remember things like that. Even when their children forget. By late morning, I decided to take down the decorations. Not because I wanted to. Because leaving them up felt pathetic somehow. I climbed carefully onto a kitchen chair and untied the silver streamers hanging above the doorway. My knees protested immediately. Walter used to joke that Illinois winters arrived early just to punish old people. This state skips fall entirely, he'd grumble every November while raking leaves in his flannel jacket. For a second, I smiled. Then the smile disappeared. The streamers went into a trash bag. Then the paper plates. Then the unopened sparkling water. Then the party hats. I moved slowly through the house dismantling evidence of hope. The birthday banner came down last. The tape left faint marks on the paint. I stared at those marks longer than necessary. It amazed me how quickly something could vanish and still leave evidence behind. Around noon, Ryan finally texted. Sorry about yesterday. We should do lunch next week. I read it 3 times. No mention of the SUV. No mention of the photos. No explanation. Just a sentence tossed toward me like loose change into a paper cup. I typed 3 different replies. Deleted all of them. Eventually I sent, "Don't worry about it." The typing bubbles appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, "Thanks for understanding, Mom." Understanding. Children. Always expect mothers to understand. Understand missed birthdays. Understand cancelled holidays. Understand broken promises. Understand being placed second. Or third. Or nowhere at all. I spent years understanding everyone else while quietly teaching myself not to need too much in return. By evening, the house looked normal again. No balloons. No streamers. No evidence anyone had ever been expected there. I stood at the living room window watching rain slide down the glass. Across town, Ryan was probably helping Vanessa learn the controls on her new SUV. Heated seats. Navigation package. Luxury upgrades. Meanwhile I was reheating leftover chicken for one. The microwave hummed softly behind me. The sound echoed through the empty kitchen. That was when I remembered something strange. Last Easter. Vanessa had called 2 days before brunch. Her voice sounded apologetic. Liam came down with a stomach bug. We're canceling. I spent Easter Sunday alone eating canned soup and watching church services online. 2 days later, my neighbor Carol casually mentioned seeing Ryan and Vanessa downtown. With Liam. And Vanessa's parents. The little guy looked perfectly healthy, she'd said. At the time, I defended them. I always defended them. Plans probably changed, I'd replied. Now I wasn't so sure. Another memory surfaced. The previous Thanksgiving. Liam's elementary school program. Vanessa told me attendance was limited because of fire regulations. Only parents this year. She sounded genuinely disappointed when she said it. Or maybe I simply wanted to believe she was. The next day, photos appeared online. I counted 3 grandparents sitting in folding chairs holding cameras. 3. I remember staring at those pictures for nearly 10 minutes. trying to convince myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. There always was. At least that's what I told myself. Then Christmas surfaced. The final Christmas before Walter died. Vanessa insisted everyone exchange gifts at her house. New traditions, she'd called it. When I arrived carrying homemade pecan pie and carefully wrapped presents, stockings already hung above the fireplace. Ryan. Vanessa. Liam. Even their dog. Everyone had a name embroidered in gold thread. Everyone except me. When I noticed, Vanessa laughed lightly. The custom order came late. Ryan kissed my cheek and told me not to worry. I didn't. At least not out loud. Later that night, I sat alone in my car while snow collected against the windshield. For reasons I couldn't explain then, I cried the entire drive home. The memory left me standing motionless in the kitchen. My dinner forgotten. My thoughts drifting. One event can be an accident. 2 events can be bad timing. 3 events can be misunderstanding. But eventually patterns begin forming whether you want to see them or not. That realization frightened me more than the birthday itself. Because if I was right, then yesterday hadn't been unusual. It had simply been honest. I carried my plate into the living room and sat down in Walter's old reading chair. The leather creaked beneath me. His blanket still rested folded across the arm. 3 years later and I still couldn't bring myself to move it. Sometimes I would sit there and almost convince myself he had only stepped outside for a moment. That he might walk through the front door carrying groceries. Or complain about the weather. Or ask what I wanted for dinner. The silence answered instead. I glanced toward the family photos lining the mantel. Ryan in his high school football uniform. Ryan holding newborn Liam. Ryan standing beside Walter at a fishing lake in Wisconsin. So many versions of my son. And yet lately I felt like I knew none of them. The little boy who once waited by the front window for me to come home from the grocery store because he wanted to help carry bags inside. Where had he gone? I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger is simple. This felt different. Like slowly realizing a language you once spoke fluently had become foreign. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the refrigerator motor hummed. And in the kitchen sat a birthday cake no one had touched. I didn't throw it away that night. I told myself it was because wasting food bothered me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Some stubborn part of me was still saving it. Still waiting. Still hoping. And that frightened me most of all. Because hope can survive long after dignity starts starving. Once you begin seeing patterns, it becomes impossible to unsee them. That was the unsettling part. Not the birthday. Not the SUV. Not even the photos. It was the realization that the signs had always been there. I had simply spent years protecting my son from the truth. The following Thursday afternoon, I sat at my kitchen counter sorting through old mail while a rerun of a cooking show played softly in the background. Outside, bare tree branches scraped against the windows whenever the wind picked up. Illinois winters arrived with a kind of slow gray heaviness that seemed to settle into both houses and people. I was halfway through a stack of grocery coupons when my phone buzzed. Another family photo notification. I almost ignored it. Instead, I opened it. Ryan and Vanessa were attending Liam's elementary school Thanksgiving program. My grandson stood proudly on stage wearing a paper pilgrim hat while parents filled rows of folding chairs below. I smiled immediately. Then the smile faded. There was an empty seat beside Ryan. A seat that used to be mine. I stared at the photo for several seconds. Last year, Vanessa had explained that grandparents were not allowed because of attendance restrictions. Only parents this time. That was what she told me. Yet in the photograph I counted grandparents everywhere. Holding cameras. Waving proudly. Smiling. A grandfather sat in the second row wearing a veteran's cap. A grandmother near the aisle held flowers. No attendance restrictions. No fire code issue. Just me. The realization settled slowly. I put the phone down and stared through the kitchen window. For years I had accepted every explanation because questioning them felt disloyal. A mother is supposed to trust her son. And if she cannot trust him, then what remains? The answer frightened me. Not much. That evening I pulled out an old plastic storage bin from the hall closet. Inside were decades of photographs. Walter always insisted on printing photographs instead of leaving them on phones. Real memories deserve paper, he used to say. The bin smelled faintly of dust and cardboard. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor and began sorting through them. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Camping trips. School graduations. Entire decades stacked neatly inside faded albums. At first, I was only looking for distraction. Then I started noticing something. A pattern. One photo showed Ryan and Vanessa standing beside a barbecue grill during a 4th of July gathering. Liam sat on Ryan's shoulders. Everyone smiled. The photo looked normal. Until I remembered taking it. Because I wasn't in it. I had been standing 10 feet away holding the camera. Another photo. A family outing to Lake Michigan. Everyone lined up near the shoreline. Again, smiling faces. Again, I remembered taking the picture. Not being in it. Taking it. Then another. And another. And another. Suddenly I noticed how often I existed behind the camera instead of inside the frame. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody ordered me out of photos. Nobody said I wasn't welcome. I simply became useful. The photographer. The babysitter. The organizer. The woman who packed sandwiches. The woman who remembered sunscreen. The woman who made things easier. Not the woman people wanted beside them when the picture was taken. I closed the album. My chest felt heavy. Not broken. Heavy. Like carrying groceries that become harder to hold with every step. The next morning, I drove to the grocery store. The parking lot was crowded with people buying Thanksgiving supplies early. Shopping carts rattled across pavement. Christmas music played through outdoor speakers despite the fact that Thanksgiving had not even arrived yet. America always rushes holidays before emotions have time to catch up. Inside, I wandered through the aisles slowly. A carton of eggs. Coffee filters. Chicken broth. The ordinary items of an ordinary life. I was reaching for a loaf of bread when someone called my name. Helen? I turned. Melissa Parker. One of Vanessa's country club acquaintances. Expensive coat. Perfect hair. Polite smile. The kind of woman who always seemed to know things she shouldn't. Helen, how are you? She asked. Oh, surviving winter, I replied. She laughed politely. We exchanged small talk for a minute before she mentioned the birthday. I heard everyone had to reschedule because of the SUV purchase. I smiled. Something like that. Melissa shifted her shopping basket. For a moment she seemed uncertain. Then she said something she probably hadn't intended to. Well, I suppose Ryan has enough on his plate right now with your future arrangements. I blinked. My future arrangements? Immediately she looked uncomfortable. The way people do when they realize they've stepped into a conversation they weren't supposed to enter. Oh. She laughed awkwardly. I just assumed you'd already discussed it. Discussed what? Nothing important. That answer told me everything. People only say nothing important when it is very important. Melissa glanced down the aisle. Then back at me. Lowering her voice slightly. Vanessa mentioned they were looking at some retirement communities near Oak Brook. My stomach tightened. Not because of retirement communities. Because I was hearing about them from Melissa. Not Ryan. Not Vanessa. Melissa. They just want you closer to them, I'm sure, she added quickly. I smiled. Women my age become experts at smiling through unpleasant discoveries. That is very thoughtful. Melissa visibly relaxed. We talked another minute before parting ways. But as I pushed my cart toward the frozen food section, something inside me had changed. A small shift. Almost imperceptible. For the first time, I wondered whether conversations about my future were happening without me. That evening, I arrived home just before sunset. The house greeted me with its usual quiet warmth. Walter's reading chair. The family photographs. The scent of cinnamon candles. 34 years of memories sitting patiently inside familiar walls. This house had witnessed every version of my life. Newlywed. Mother. Widow. Grandmother. And apparently now. Obstacle. The thought appeared before I could stop it. I hated it immediately. But it remained. I carried groceries into the kitchen and began putting everything away. That was when I noticed the blinking light on the answering machine. One new message. I pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the room. Cheerful. Casual. The same voice he used whenever he wanted something difficult to sound harmless. Hey Mom. Vanessa and I were thinking maybe we should all have dinner soon. A pause. We need to talk about some things moving forward. Moving forward. I had heard that phrase before. Doctors used it. Lawyers used it. People used it when they wanted change that benefited them. I listened to the message twice. Then sat quietly at the kitchen table. Outside, darkness settled across the neighborhood. The refrigerator hummed softly. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall. And for the first time in years, I did not immediately call my son back. The strange thing about finally seeing people clearly is that you stop behaving the way they expect. For years Ryan and Vanessa relied on one thing above all else. My predictability. I was the dependable mother. The available grandmother. The woman who always said yes before anyone finished asking. The woman who understood. The woman who adjusted. The woman who waited. But that night, sitting alone in the kitchen, I found myself staring at the birthday cake still resting inside the refrigerator. Only one small slice was missing. I had eaten it the previous evening. Not because I wanted cake. Because I couldn't bear throwing it away. The frosting had begun drying along the edges. The roses no longer looked fresh. I stared at it for a long time. Then slowly closed the refrigerator door. Some things spoil when they're ignored. And suddenly I wasn't sure whether I was thinking about the cake. Or my relationship with my son. There are some losses that arrive all at once. A phone call. A diagnosis. A funeral. And then there are losses that happen so slowly you don't realize they are happening until years later. Lying in bed that night, I found myself thinking less about Vanessa and more about Walter. Maybe because whenever something in my life stopped making sense, he had always been the person who helped me understand it. For 37 years, he had been my first conversation every morning and my last conversation every night. Then one day he wasn't. And somehow the world expected me to continue as though half of my language hadn't disappeared. Sleep never came. Around 2 a.m, I gave up trying. I pulled on my robe and padded downstairs. The house felt different at night. Older. The creaks in the floorboards sounded louder. The shadows seemed longer. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. A distant wind rattled the bare branches outside. Everything else was silent. I wandered into Walter's study. 3 years later, I still called it Walter's study. Not my office. Not the spare room. Walter's study. The room looked almost exactly as he left it. His leather chair sat near the window. His reading lamp remained beside it. A framed photograph from our 25th wedding anniversary rested on the bookshelf. People often told me I should redecorate. Move things around. Make the room my own. But grief doesn't work that way. Sometimes preserving a room isn't about refusing to move forward. It's about keeping a door unlocked for memories. I sat carefully in his chair. The leather creaked beneath me. For a moment, I closed my eyes. And there he was. Not physically. Just in memory. Walter laughing while trying to assemble a backyard grill. Walter singing off-key while washing dishes. Walter falling asleep during baseball games and insisting he had been watching the entire time. The kind of ordinary moments nobody photographs. The moments you miss most. My gaze drifted toward the desk drawer. I had not opened it in months. Maybe longer. Something compelled me to do it now. Inside were the usual things. Pens. Old receipts. Instruction manuals. A deck of cards missing 2 queens. Walter always lost playing cards somehow. Near the back sat a small leather-bound notebook. I recognized it immediately. His pocket journal. Walter carried it for years. He used it mostly for reminders. Home repair measurements. Grocery lists. Random thoughts. Nothing important. At least that was what he always claimed. I opened it carefully. The pages smelled faintly of old paper. Most entries were exactly what I expected. Replace furnace filter. Call insurance. Pick up Helen's prescription. Buy birdseed. Simple things. Life things. Then I found an entry from 6 years earlier. Ryan's name appeared beside it. I paused. Underneath. Walter had written, proud of him. Still calls every Sunday no matter how busy he gets. I smiled. Because it was true. Ryan used to call every Sunday. Every single one. After college. After marriage. Even when Liam was born. Sunday afternoons belonged to family. Somewhere along the way, that tradition disappeared. I couldn't even remember exactly when. Only that one day I noticed months had passed between calls. The realization stung more than I expected. Not because traditions change. Because I had accepted the change without asking why. I turned another page. There was another note. Shorter this time. Ryan worries too much about pleasing everyone. I stared at the words. Then read them again. Ryan worries too much about pleasing everyone. Walter had always understood people better than I did. Especially our son. I thought about the way Ryan avoided conflict. The way he smiled through uncomfortable conversations. The way he often chose the easiest path instead of the right one. As a child, he hated disappointing anyone. Teachers loved him. Neighbors adored him. Friends trusted him. Ryan spent most of his life trying to keep everyone happy. The problem was that eventually someone always pays the price for that. Lately, that someone seemed to be me. The next morning arrived gray and cold. I spent most of it cleaning. Not because the house needed cleaning. Because keeping my hands busy felt easier than sitting with my thoughts. Laundry. Dusting. Vacuuming. The small rituals that make a house feel cared for. Around noon, I found myself in the hallway closet sorting through old storage boxes. One contained Christmas decorations. Another held tax records. A third was filled with things Walter saved because he believed every object might someday become useful. Inside was an old photo album. The cover had begun peeling at the corners. I carried it into the living room and settled onto the couch. The first pages showed Ryan as a toddler. Ryan in kindergarten. Ryan holding a fishing pole nearly bigger than himself. Then came high school. Football games. Prom photos. Graduation. There was one picture that stopped me completely. Ryan at age 12. Standing beside Walter. In our backyard. The maple trees behind them barely taller than fence posts. Ryan was grinning. Walter had one arm around his shoulders. Both of them covered in dirt from planting those trees. I remembered that day perfectly. Ryan complained the entire afternoon. The holes were too deep. The shovel was too heavy. The work was boring. Yet afterward he stood proudly beside those trees as though he had built a national monument. Walter framed that photo the following week. "One day those trees will be taller than the house," he'd said. At the time, I laughed. Today, those same trees towered over the roof. Time sneaks up on people. One season at a time. One missed phone call at a time. One forgotten birthday at a time. Until suddenly everything looks different. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. Ryan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded unusually careful. "Hi." A pause. "Everything okay?" There was something almost absurd about the question. As if forgetting my birthday and replacing it with a luxury SUV purchase was simply an unfortunate scheduling issue. "Everything's fine," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I've been meaning to call." I waited. Ryan cleared his throat. "You know Vanessa and I care about you, right?" There it was. The kind of sentence people use when they're about to discuss something uncomfortable. Like a doctor beginning with reassuring words before sharing test results. "Of course," I said. "Good." Silence followed. I could hear traffic in the background. Maybe he was driving. Maybe he was sitting in a parking lot trying to gather courage. Finally he spoke again. "We should have dinner this weekend." "The dinner where we talk about moving forward?" His hesitation answered before his words did. "Something like that." I looked across the room toward the photograph of Walter on the mantel. The one from our anniversary. He seemed to be smiling at something just outside the frame. For the first time, a strange thought entered my mind. What would Walter say about all of this? Not about the house. Not about retirement communities. Not about money. About family. About Ryan. About me. The answer came surprisingly quickly. Walter would tell me to stop pretending not to see what was right in front of me. Because denial feels safer than heartbreak. Until it doesn't. After we hung up, I walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The birthday cake sat exactly where I left it. The frosting roses had begun collapsing slightly. The edges looked dry. I cut another small slice. Placed it on a plate. And sat alone at the table. The same table where I had waited 3 hours for my family. The same table where 4 plates had once been set. As I took a bite, I realized something painful. The cake still tasted exactly the same. Chocolate. Buttercream. A little too sweet. The recipe hadn't changed. The cake hadn't changed. Only the people around it had. And somehow that hurt more than I was prepared for. Because for the first time I began wondering whether Ryan had been drifting away from me long before he forgot my birthday. And if that was true, then what else had I been refusing to see? Saturday afternoon arrived wrapped in freezing rain and low gray clouds. The kind of weather that made the entire world feel smaller. I had just finished folding laundry when my phone rang. Claire Benson. For nearly 20 years, Claire and I had shared the sort of friendship women build slowly. Church fundraisers. School volunteering. Holiday potlucks. Long conversations over coffee after difficult years. Her husband passed away 5 years ago. Ever since then, she seemed to possess an almost uncomfortable ability to recognize loneliness in other people. "Helen," she said after I answered. "Are you busy?" "Nothing important." "Good. Then meet me for coffee." "I can hear the order in your voice." "That is because it was an order." For the first time all week, I laughed. A real laugh. Not a polite one. Give me 30 minutes. The cafe sat near downtown Naperville. Warm lights glowed through fogged windows while shoppers hurried past outside carrying bags from early holiday sales. Inside, the smell of coffee and cinnamon wrapped around me the moment I walked through the door. Claire was already waiting near the back. Peppermint latte. Blue scarf. Reading glasses. Perched on top of her head. Some people never change. Thank God. She looked up as I approached. Then she frowned. You look tired. Women our age never ask if you're okay. We know better. We look at each other's faces and simply tell the truth. I removed my gloves and sat down. Not sleeping much. Claire nodded. Me neither. Your arthritis? My daughter. I smiled faintly. Children remain exhausting long after they stop being children. That should be embroidered on pillows. The waitress arrived. Coffee was ordered. Small talk followed. Weather. Groceries. Holiday decorations appearing too early. The comfortable rhythm of two women who no longer needed to impress each other. Eventually, as always, the conversation drifted toward family. It always does. Especially after 60. I saw Ryan and Vanessa at Oakbrook Mall last weekend. The statement landed lightly. But something inside me immediately sharpened. Oh? Claire stirred her latte. That SUV of theirs is enormous. Apparently. She studied me over the rim of her cup. I almost didn't bring this up. Whenever someone says that, they absolutely plan to bring it up. I waited. Outside, sleet tapped softly against the window. Helen, I think you deserve to know something. My stomach tightened. Not from fear. From recognition. The feeling that another piece of a puzzle was about to slide into place. What is it? Claire looked down at her drink for a moment. Then sighed. I was at the country club luncheon a few weeks ago. I remained silent. Vanessa was there. Of course she was. Claire continued. She was sitting with Melissa Parker and some women from the real estate board. The mention of Melissa immediately caught my attention. What were they talking about? Claire hesitated. I don't think she realized I could hear her. Something cold moved through my chest. Not shock. Not anymore. Just anticipation. Claire finally met my eyes. She was joking about older people hanging on to houses too long. I felt my fingers tighten around my coffee cup. Then someone mentioned property values. A pause. Vanessa laughed and said Ryan would never really get ahead financially until certain properties finally changed hands. The words settled between us. Heavy. Uncomfortable. I looked down at the dark surface of my coffee. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Around us, dishes clattered. Milk steamed. Young couples discussed Christmas shopping. Ordinary life continued. Yet somehow everything felt different. I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. The words came out automatically. I hated them the moment I heard them. Claire gave me a look. Not angry. Not judgmental. Sad. Helen. I sighed. I know. No. I don't think you do. That surprised me. Claire rarely pushed. Today she did. You've spent years translating that woman's behavior into something kinder than it really is. The sentence landed harder than anything Vanessa had ever said. Because it felt true. Painfully true. I thought about Easter. The school program. The family photos. The birthday. Each memory suddenly replayed differently. Not as isolated incidents. As part of a pattern. A long pattern. A deliberate one. Claire softened her voice. I understand why you do it. I looked up. Do you? Of course. She smiled sadly. Because I used to do the same thing. That caught my attention. Claire rarely talked about herself. What happened? She looked out the window. The silence stretched several seconds. My daughter. The words emerged quietly. For years I convinced myself she was just busy. I said nothing. I told myself she forgot to call because she worked long hours. Claire stared into her coffee. I told myself she missed holidays because travel was difficult. Another pause. I told myself she loved me. The final sentence nearly broke my heart. Because I understood exactly what she meant. Not that her daughter didn't love her. But that Claire had spent years translating neglect into affection. The same way I had. What changed? I asked softly. Claire smiled without humor. One day I stopped listening to excuses and started paying attention to behavior. Outside, wind rattled against the windows. Inside, something shifted inside me. Not dramatically. Just enough. The way ice begins cracking beneath a frozen lake. You know something? Claire continued. I think your birthday wasn't the real problem. No? She shook her head. The birthday just forced you to notice the problem. I stared at her. Because deep down, I already knew she was right. The birthday wasn't the wound. It was the moment I finally looked at it. We sat quietly for a while after that. Then Claire reached across the table and touched my hand. A simple gesture. But after the week I'd had, it nearly made me cry. Helen. Yes? I don't think this is really about a house. The words immediately caught my attention. Because they echoed my own thoughts. Claire continued. I think they're already treating your life like something that belongs to them. Neither of us spoke after that. The truth hung between us. Unwelcome. Impossible to ignore. On the drive home, sleet coated the roads in a thin layer of ice. The windshield wipers moved back and forth steadily. My thoughts drifted toward Walter. Toward Ryan. Toward all the years in between. I remembered Ryan at 12 helping Walter plant maple trees. Ryan at 16 asking if I would stay up until he got home from prom. Ryan at 22 calling every Sunday. Ryan at 35 carrying baby Liam through my front door. At what point had that son become a man discussing my future before discussing it with me? I didn't know. And somehow that uncertainty hurt more than certainty ever could. When I arrived home, darkness had already settled across the neighborhood. The house greeted me with familiar silence. I hung my coat. Placed my keys in the bowl near the door. Then stopped. The answering machine was blinking. One new message. I pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the kitchen. Hey Mom. Just checking in. A pause. Then, Vanessa and I were wondering if you'd be available next Friday. Another pause. We need to talk about some long-term plans. Long-term plans. There it was again. The phrase. The language. The careful wording. As though my life had become a project waiting for approval. The message ended. I stared at the machine. Then slowly looked around the kitchen. At Walter's coffee mug. At the family photos. At the refrigerator. At the birthday cake still sitting inside. Waiting. Just like I had been waiting. For explanations. For invitations. For consideration. For my son. 4 years. And for the first time since my birthday, I did not feel sad. I felt alert. Because something inside me finally understood a painful truth. The people making plans for my future had never once asked me what I wanted. And that realization changed everything. End of part 5. Monday morning arrived with freezing temperatures and a strange feeling I could not quite name. Not fear. Not anger. Something quieter. Like the moment before a storm arrives, when the air changes pressure and everything suddenly feels too still. I was standing in the kitchen rinsing oatmeal bowls when the phone rang. Not my cell phone. The landline. Almost nobody called the landline anymore except doctors' offices and telemarketers. I nearly ignored it. Almost. Mrs. Whitmore? A woman's voice. Professional. Polite. This is Denise from Prairie State Community Bank. I dried my hands on a dish towel. How can I help you? There was a request regarding information connected to your property records. We just needed to verify authorization before releasing anything. My hand stopped moving. Property records. The phrase sounded harmless. But something inside me immediately tightened. I'm sorry, I said carefully. What kind of request? There was a brief pause. Paper shuffling. Keyboard clicking. The sounds of an ordinary office. We received an inquiry regarding access to information associated with your residence and estate planning documents. Estate planning. Residence. Inquiry. The words stacked together like small stones. Individually harmless. Together uncomfortable. And who made the inquiry? Another pause. Long enough for me to know I wasn't going to like the answer. Ryan Whitmore. For several seconds, I said nothing. Outside the kitchen window, frost covered the backyard grass. The maple trees Walter planted with Ryan swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked perfectly normal. Yet suddenly nothing felt normal at all. I thanked Denise. Confirmed that no authorization had been given. Listened politely while she explained security procedures. Then I hung up. The kitchen became silent again. Only the refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. A dog barked somewhere down the street. I stood there holding the receiver long after the call ended. Not because I was shocked. Because I was trying to understand. Ryan had not asked me about my finances in years. Not directly. But now memories surfaced. Little comments. Little questions. Comments I once interpreted as concern. Property values around here have really gone up. This house must be expensive to maintain. You should think about simplifying things eventually. At the time, I heard love. Now I heard something else. Or maybe I wasn't sure what I heard anymore. That uncertainty frightened me most. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store. Not because I needed groceries. Because sitting alone in the house felt impossible. The parking lot buzzed with early holiday shoppers. Carts rattled. Christmas music drifted through outdoor speakers. People hurried between cars carrying wrapping paper and oversized boxes. Everyone seemed busy preparing for family. I found myself wondering when preparing for family had become so lonely. Inside, I wandered without purpose. Soup aisle. Frozen foods. Produce section. I barely noticed what I was looking at. My thoughts kept returning to the same question. Why hadn't Ryan asked me? If he had concerns, why not talk to me? If he wanted to help, why start with paperwork? The answer refused to settle comfortably. Helen? I turned. Melissa Parker. Again. This time she carried organic vegetables and wore an expensive camel-colored coat. She smiled politely. The smile of someone who enjoys information. Good to see you. You too. For a minute we discussed nothing important. Weather. Holiday shopping. Traffic. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. How are the plans coming? I blinked. What plans? Melissa's expression changed immediately. Tiny. But noticeable. The look people get when they realize they've accidentally opened the wrong door. Oh. She laughed awkwardly. I thought Ryan and Vanessa already talked to you. My heartbeat slowed. Strangely, it always slowed when I became upset. As if some part of me grew calm while the rest of me panicked. Talk to me about what? Melissa adjusted her shopping basket. Avoided eye contact. Then sighed. The retirement communities. There it was. Again. Not from Ryan. Not from Vanessa. From someone else. Just like before. The realization hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Not because retirement communities bothered me. Because everyone seemed to know about the conversation except the person whose life it involved. Me. Oh. I smiled. The same polite smile women my age learn to wear in difficult situations. Those plans. Melissa visibly relaxed. Well, Vanessa was saying you would probably be happier closer to them. Happier. Such a dangerous word. People use it all the time when describing lives that do not belong to them. I nodded. That is thoughtful. Exactly. Melissa seemed relieved. Vanessa just worries about you. The statement lingered between us. I wanted to believe it. God help me, I really did. Because the alternative was painful. The alternative suggested that concern had become strategy. And I wasn't ready to fully accept that. Not yet. When I arrived home, I found myself standing in the driveway longer than necessary. The house looked exactly the same. Two-story colonial. White shutters. Brick walkway. Maple trees. Home. Walter used to joke that he could find this house blindfolded. Now I wondered whether Ryan still saw it the same way. Did he see memories? Or square footage? Did he see family? Or opportunity? The questions made me uncomfortable. Mostly because I didn't know the answers. Inside, the answering machine blinked. One message. Ryan. Again. Hey Mom. His voice sounded cheerful. Too cheerful. The way people sound when rehearsing difficult conversations. Vanessa and I were hoping Friday still works. A pause. We really need to talk about some things moving forward. Moving forward. There was that phrase again. Always moving forward. Never talking about the present. Never talking about the birthday. Never talking about what actually happened. The message ended. I stared at the machine. Then, for the first time in years, I did something unusual. I did not call my son back. That evening, I sat in Walter's reading chair with a blanket across my lap. Snow had begun falling outside. The first real snowfall of the season. Large flakes drifted beneath the streetlights. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Almost beautiful. I held one of Walter's old notebooks in my hands. The same one I had found days earlier. My eyes drifted again to a sentence he wrote years ago. Ryan worries too much about pleasing everyone. Back then, Walter said it affectionately. Today it felt prophetic. Because suddenly I could see it. Ryan hated disappointing people. Teachers. Friends. Coworkers. His wife. And somewhere along the way, he learned a dangerous lesson. The safest person to disappoint was his mother. Because mothers forgive. Mothers understand. Mothers wait. The realization settled heavily into my chest. Not because it was cruel. Because it was probably true. The refrigerator motor clicked on in the kitchen. Without thinking, I walked over and opened the door. The birthday cake still sat inside. Smaller now. Only half remained. The frosting roses had begun collapsing. The edges looked dry. A little sad. A little forgotten. I cut another slice. Carried it to the table. And sat alone in the quiet house. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, memories continued arriving. Ryan at 10 years old blowing out candles. Ryan at 16 eating 3 pieces of cake because football season made him constantly hungry. Ryan at 25 showing up late but still showing up. Ryan at 35 forgetting entirely. I stared down at the plate. The cake tasted exactly the same. But something inside me had changed. For weeks I had been asking, why is Vanessa doing this? Now another question felt more important. A harder question. A sadder one. Why is Ryan allowing it? And for the first time since my birthday, I realized I might not like the answer. The strange thing about finally seeing people clearly is that you stop behaving the way they expect. For years, Ryan and Vanessa relied on one thing above all else. My predictability. I was the dependable mother. The available grandmother. The woman who always said yes before anyone finished asking. The woman who understood. The woman who adjusted. The woman who waited. And because I always waited, nobody ever worried I might stop. 3 days after Ryan left his last message, Vanessa texted me. Can you watch Liam Saturday? We have a few things to handle. I stared at the screen. Normally, I would have answered immediately. I would have rearranged my entire weekend. Bought Liam's favorite orange juice. Made chocolate chip cookies. Prepared the guest room in case he wanted to stay overnight. Instead, I sat quietly for nearly 10 minutes. Then I typed, I'm sorry. I already have plans. The response came almost immediately. Oh. Okay. Nothing else. No question about my plans. No curiosity. No disappointment. Just acceptance. As if my value existed primarily in my availability. The realization stung more than I expected. Saturday morning arrived bright and cold. Fresh snow covered the neighborhood. Every rooftop looked dipped in white paint. For the first time in years, I spent an entire Saturday doing exactly what I wanted. Not what someone needed. Not what someone expected. What I wanted. It felt surprisingly unfamiliar. I drove to a small bookstore in downtown Naperville. Browsed slowly. Bought a mystery novel. Stopped at a cafe. Read 2 chapters while drinking coffee. Nobody called. Nobody checked on me. Nobody asked where I was. And somehow that hurt. Not because I needed permission. Because I realized how rarely anyone wondered about my life anymore. People knew what I could provide. Babysitting. Holiday meals. Emotional support. But very few seemed interested in who I was once those services were removed. That afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the family photo wall near the staircase. The wall had grown over decades. Birthdays. Vacations. Graduations. Anniversaries. A visual timeline of our family. I studied the photographs carefully. Not as a mother. Not as a grandmother. As an observer. For the first time. And something became impossible to ignore. In older photographs, I was everywhere. Holding Ryan. Laughing beside Walter. Standing at the center of family gatherings. Present. Visible. As the years passed, something shifted. Not dramatically. Gradually. The way shorelines change after years of waves. I moved farther toward the edges. Then farther. Then farther. Until. Eventually I was absent altogether. Not removed. Not excluded. Simply forgotten. I thought about the beach photo again. The one Vanessa posted years ago. The cropped version. The version where I did not exist. I remembered standing 2 feet outside the frame holding a cooler full of sandwiches I had prepared for everyone. At the time, I laughed it off. Now it felt different. Now it felt symbolic. That evening, the phone rang. Ryan. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, Mom. His voice sounded tired. Not guilty. Tired. Hi, sweetheart. A long pause followed. Long enough to feel real. Not scripted. Not rehearsed. Real. Finally he spoke. Did Vanessa text you? About Liam? Yeah. She did. Another pause. You couldn't watch him? I smiled faintly. Not because it was funny. Because I suddenly understood something. Ryan had not asked how I was. He had not asked about my week. He had not asked whether I wanted company. His first concern was childcare. The old version of me would have ignored that. The new version couldn't. No, I said gently. I had plans. Oh. The disappointment in his voice surprised me. Not because he sounded angry. Because he sounded confused. As though it had never occurred to him that I might have a life independent of theirs. What kind of plans? He asked. The question almost made me laugh. Not cruelly. Just sadly. I went to a bookstore. A bookstore? Then I had coffee. Silence. I imagined him processing the information. Somewhere across town. Probably sitting in his kitchen. Probably surprised by how ordinary my answer sounded. For years, my schedule revolved around everyone else's needs. Maybe he genuinely couldn't imagine me doing something just for myself. That sounds nice, he finally said. It was. Another silence. Then, Mom? Yes? I'd been meaning to ask. His voice trailed off. I waited. Sometimes people reveal more in hesitation than in speech. Finally he continued. Are you upset with me? The question settled between us. Heavy. Honest. Unexpected. I looked toward the window. Snow drifted beneath the streetlights. The same way it had the night Walter died. The same way it had the night of my birthday. For a moment, I thought about lying. Making things easier. That had always been my specialty. Instead, I told the truth. A little. Ryan exhaled softly. Not defensive. Not angry. Relieved. As if hearing the truth felt easier than guessing. I deserve that. The admission surprised me. Because it sounded genuine. Not performative. Not strategic. Genuine. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Ryan said something I wasn't expecting. I keep thinking about Dad. The words instantly caught my attention. Do you? Yeah. His voice grew quieter. He would have remembered your birthday. I closed my eyes. Because that was exactly what Walter would have done. Not because he was perfect. Because he paid attention. There is a difference. Ryan continued. Dad remembered everything. I almost smiled. No, he didn't. Ryan laughed softly. The first real laugh of the conversation. Okay. Maybe not everything. He forgot our anniversary once. What? He spent 3 days sleeping on the couch. Ryan laughed harder. For a moment, the distance between us felt smaller. Not gone. Smaller. Then silence returned. And with it came something else. Sadness. Not mine. His. I don't know when everything got so complicated, Ryan said quietly. I thought about answering. But something stopped me. Because deep down, I wasn't sure things had become complicated. I thought they had become convenient. Convenient for Vanessa. Convenient for Ryan. Convenient for everyone except the person being pushed aside. But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I asked a different question. Ryan? Yeah? When was the last time you came here because you wanted to see me? Silence. Complete silence. No traffic. No background noise. Nothing. The question had found its target. I knew it immediately. Because he didn't answer. And sometimes silence is the most honest answer a person can give. After we hung up, I sat alone in Walter's chair for a long time. Thinking. Not about Vanessa. Not about retirement communities. Not about the house. About Ryan. For weeks I had viewed him as a participant. An accomplice. A man choosing convenience over loyalty. Part of that was true. But tonight I saw something else. Weakness. Confusion. Avoidance. Ryan wasn't driving the situation. He was drifting through it. Allowing it. Enabling it. But not creating it. That realization did not excuse him. If anything, it hurt more. Because villains are easy to hate. Weak people are harder. Weak people remind you of the versions of themselves they used to be. The versions you still love. Later that night, before going upstairs, I opened the refrigerator one more time. Only a few slices of birthday cake remained. The frosting roses had collapsed completely now. Their shape barely recognizable. I stood there staring at them. Then I remembered Ryan at 10 years old. Face covered in chocolate frosting. Laughing so hard he could barely blow out his candles. Back then, if someone had told me that one day I would feel lonely because of that little boy, I never would have believed them. Yet here I was. Holding a plate of leftover birthday cake. Missing a son who was still alive. And somehow that was the hardest part of all. Friday arrived beneath a sky the color of old steel. Snow from earlier in the week still lined the streets in uneven piles. The neighborhood looked festive from a distance. Wreaths hung from front doors. Christmas lights blinked along rooftops. Inflatable snowmen leaned awkwardly across frozen lawns. Every house looked warm. Not every house felt warm. I spent most of the day cooking. Pot roast simmered slowly in the oven. Fresh dinner rolls cooled on the counter. Cinnamon candles burned softly throughout the house. The familiar routines calmed me. Not because I believed dinner would fix anything. Because cooking had always helped me think. Walter used to joke that I solved problems through casseroles. Maybe he was right. Around 3 o'clock, I found myself standing at the kitchen window looking toward the maple trees. The same trees Ryan and Walter planted together more than 20 years ago. Snow rested on the branches. For a moment, I could almost see them out there again. Walter holding the shovel. Ryan complaining. Both of them pretending not to enjoy themselves. The memory made me smile. Then the smile faded. Because tonight wasn't about memories. Tonight was about the future. And judging from the conversations happening around me lately, everyone seemed eager to discuss my future except me. At 5:45, headlights appeared in the driveway. Ryan's SUV. Behind it sat Vanessa's new black vehicle. The one that cost my birthday. I hated myself a little for thinking that. But it was true. The sight of it still hurt. A few moments later, the front door opened. Grandma. Liam burst into the house like a hurricane. 11 years old now. All energy and noise and growing limbs. He wrapped his arms around me before I could even finish greeting him. For one brief moment, the heaviness of the last few weeks disappeared. Children have that gift. Or at least good children do. Hey there, buddy. I brought my science project. Did you now? And I got an A. Of course you did. He grinned proudly. Behind him, Ryan carried a dessert box while Vanessa removed her gloves. Her smile appeared immediately. Polished. Pleasant. Perfect. The kind of smile that photographs well. Helen, she said warmly. You look wonderful. The compliment landed strangely. Because for years I would have believed it. Now I found myself wondering whether she even noticed what I looked like. Thank you. Ryan stepped forward and hugged me. The hug lasted longer than usual. Not dramatically longer. Just enough for me to notice. His eyes looked tired. The shadows beneath them seemed darker than I remembered. For the first time in weeks, I wondered if he had been sleeping any better than I had. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Liam talked almost non-stop. School projects. Basketball practice. Christmas gifts he hoped to receive. Normal things. Wonderful things. The sort of conversation families are supposed to have. For a little while, I almost forgot why everyone was there. Almost. Then Liam unknowingly shattered the illusion. Mom says Grandma won't be living here forever. The room instantly became silent. Utterly silent. Liam looked around, confused. Children always notice tension after they've already created it. Ryan froze. Vanessa's smile disappeared for a fraction of a second. Then returned. Polished. Controlled. Dangerous. Sweetheart, Vanessa said. Lightly, that's not exactly what I said. It kinda is. Ryan stared down at his plate. I watched him carefully. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't. Nothing. Not one word. Not one correction. Not one reassurance. The silence hurt more than any sentence could have. Liam sensed something was wrong and quickly changed the subject. The conversation limped forward. But the atmosphere had changed. Everyone felt it. Especially Ryan. I noticed him glancing toward me several times during dinner. The way guilty people do. The way people look at a wound they helped create. After dessert, Liam carried his science project into the living room. The television came on. The adults remained at the dining table. The real reason for the evening finally settling into place. Vanessa folded her napkin carefully. Then smiled. That same careful smile. Helen, we've been thinking a lot about your future. There it was. Your future. As though I had somehow become absent from my own life. I folded my hands calmly. Have you? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa continued. We just worry about you. I almost laughed. Not because the statement was ridiculous. Because I had heard it so many times recently. Everyone worried. Nobody asked. There is a difference. This house is a lot for one person. Ryan finally spoke. The words sounded rehearsed. As though he had practiced them beforehand. Especially during winters. Vanessa nodded. Those stairs make me nervous. I looked toward the staircase. The same staircase Ryan sprinted up and down thousands of times as a child. The same staircase Walter carried Christmas decorations down every December. The same staircase I climbed every night without assistance. Interesting how dangerous it suddenly became. I'm managing fine. Vanessa smiled again. Patient. Understanding. The smile people use when speaking to children. Or the elderly. Or anyone they secretly believe incapable of making decisions. Of course you are. Then came the brochure. Ryan removed it from his jacket pocket. Glossy paper. Professional photographs. Silver-haired couples laughing beside landscaped walking paths. Retirement communities near Oak Brook. I recognized the logo immediately. Melissa had unknowingly prepared me for it. Still, seeing it in front of me felt different. More personal. More painful. Ryan slid it gently across the table. We thought you could take a look. The brochure stopped directly in front of my plate. Like an invitation. Or a warning. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The grandfather clock ticked softly in the hallway. The pot roast smell still lingered faintly in the air. Outside, wind brushed against the windows. Inside, 34 years of memories seemed to gather quietly around me. Walter building the back deck. Ryan learning to ride a bike. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Late-night conversations. hospital visits. Ordinary life. An entire lifetime contained within these walls. Vanessa looked at me expectantly. Ryan looked nervous. And suddenly I realized something important. Neither of them understood what this house actually meant. To them it was property. Maintenance. Square footage. Future value. To me it was evidence. Proof that my life happened. Proof that Walter existed. Proof that Ryan had once been a little boy who loved his mother. We just want what's best for you. Vanessa's voice softened further. That sentence nearly broke my heart. Because once upon a time I think Ryan genuinely believed it. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. The tired eyes. The tense shoulders. The nervous tapping of his fingers against the table. And for the first time I saw something clearly. Ryan wasn't leading this conversation. He wasn't even comfortable in it. But he was participating. And that mattered. Maybe more than anything else. I pushed the brochure back across the table. Slowly. Calmly. Without anger. Without drama. Without raising my voice. No. The word landed quietly. Yet somehow filled the room. Vanessa blinked. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? He asked. I met his eyes. Steadily. I mean no. Silence followed. Long, heavy. Unavoidable. For the first time since my birthday, neither Ryan nor Vanessa seemed completely certain they understood me anymore. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain. That felt like the beginning of something. Not revenge. Not victory. Something better. Control. After Ryan and Vanessa left that night, the house felt unusually quiet. Not empty. Not lonely. Just quiet. There is a difference. Loneliness feels like something is missing. Quiet feels like something has finally stopped demanding your attention. I stood at the front window and watched their taillights disappear down the street. Vanessa's SUV followed behind Ryan's vehicle. Two sets of red lights fading into the darkness. For years, moments like that would leave me feeling abandoned. This one felt different. Not better. Different. Because for the first time I had not adjusted myself to make someone else comfortable. I had simply said no. And the world had not ended. The grandfather clock chimed 9 times. I locked the front door and walked slowly through the house. The dining room still carried traces of dinner. Wine glasses. Folded napkins. Crumbs from Liam's dinner roll. The brochure remained on the table. Abandoned. Forgotten. Or perhaps rejected. I stared at it for several moments. The smiling silver-haired couples. The manicured gardens. The promises of simplicity. Comfort. Community. Security. Everything about it seemed carefully designed to make surrender feel elegant. I picked it up. Folded it once. Then placed it in the recycling bin. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Simply because it belonged there. Later that evening, I found myself standing in Walter's study. The room had become a refuge over the past few weeks. Not because it held answers. Because it held honesty. Nothing in that room pretended to be something it wasn't. Walter's chair remained Walter's chair. His books remained his books. His life remained visible. I sat down and looked around quietly. A framed photograph rested on the bookshelf. Our wedding day. I was 24. Walter was 26. We looked impossibly young. The kind of young that only exists in photographs. For several minutes, I stared at the picture. Then I spoke aloud. Something I had not done in a long time. I think I finally see it. The room remained silent. Yet somehow I felt less alone. I kept waiting for them to choose me. The words surprised me. Because they were true. For years, I had waited. Waited for invitations. Waited for phone calls. Waited for holidays. Waited for effort. Waited for signs that I still mattered. The birthday had only exposed what had already existed. A painful imbalance. I was still choosing them. They had stopped choosing me. The realization hurt. But not as much as I expected. Perhaps because grief becomes easier once it has a name. Before, I felt confused. Now I understood. And understanding changes everything. I looked again at the wedding photograph. You always saw things sooner than I did. Walter would have laughed at that. Then denied it. Then quietly proven it 5 minutes later. I smiled. A real smile. Small. Private. The kind people have when speaking to someone they still love. Even after death. The next morning, snow covered the neighborhood in a fresh layer of white. I woke early and made coffee. The house felt peaceful. For weeks my thoughts had revolved around Ryan and Vanessa. What they were doing. What they wanted. What they planned. For the first time, my thoughts returned to me. What did I want? The question felt strangely unfamiliar. Women like me spend decades answering everyone else's needs. Eventually you forget to ask your own. I carried my coffee to the kitchen table and sat quietly. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder Walter built years ago. The sight immediately brought back a memory. Ryan at 14. Standing in this exact kitchen. Arguing with Walter about college. Neither of them willing to admit they were having the same conversation from different sides. Walter wanted Ryan to leave home and build a life. Ryan wanted reassurance that home would still exist when he came back. Both of them were terrified. Neither admitted it. I smiled at the memory. Then another thought surfaced. For years, I had interpreted Ryan's distance as indifference. But what if some of it was something else? Avoidance. Weakness. Fear. Those weren't excuses. They were explanations. And explanations matter. Because they help you understand people without surrendering to them. Around noon, my phone rang. Claire. Well, she asked immediately. I laughed. Hello to you too. I know how to say hello. Tell me what happened. I settled deeper into my chair. He brought a brochure. Oh no. Oh yes. Retirement community? Oak Brook. Claire groaned dramatically. I knew it. For the next 20 minutes, I told her everything. The brochure. The conversation. The silence. My refusal. When I finished, Claire remained quiet for several seconds. Then she said something unexpected. I'm proud of you. I blinked. Proud of me? Yes. For saying no? For finally acting like your life belongs to you. The sentence settled into my chest. Warmly. Because I realized how long it had been since anyone spoke to me that way. Not as a mother. Not as a grandmother. Not as a widow. As Helen. After we hung up, I found myself wandering upstairs. Eventually I stopped outside the guest room. Years ago, it had been Ryan's bedroom. Most of his childhood had unfolded inside those walls. I opened the door. The room remained mostly unchanged. The furniture was different. The colors were different. But memories lingered. I could still picture him sitting on the floor building model airplanes. Still hear him practicing speeches for school. Still see him studying late at night before exams. A lifetime ago. And yet somehow yesterday. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly beneath my weight. For several minutes, I simply looked around. Then my gaze landed on a small wooden shelf near the window. A forgotten object sat in the corner. A baseball trophy. Ryan's first. Second place. Age 10. The metal figure on top still held a bat. The plaque had begun fading. I picked it up carefully. And suddenly I remembered the day he won it. Not because he came in second. Because afterward he cried. 10-year-old Ryan had been devastated. I wasn't good enough. That was what he kept saying. Walter sat beside him for nearly an hour. Eventually he told him something neither of us ever forgot. The people who love you aren't keeping score. I stared down at the trophy. The memory hit harder than expected. Because somewhere along the way, Ryan had begun measuring relationships differently. Convenience. Obligation. Practicality. Efficiency. The language adults use when they stop paying. Attention to love. That evening, I opened the refrigerator. Only 2 slices of birthday cake remained. The frosting roses had collapsed completely. Their shape gone. Their beauty faded. Yet the cake still smelled faintly of chocolate. I cut 1 slice. Placed it on a plate. And carried it into the living room. As snow drifted softly outside, I sat in Walter's chair and ate slowly. Not because I was hungry. Because I wasn't ready to throw it away yet. Some part of me understood that the cake had become something more than dessert. It had become a reminder. Of waiting. Of hoping. Of disappointment. And perhaps most importantly, of awakening. Because if my 65th birthday had taught me anything, it was this: the most painful betrayals are rarely sudden. They happen one small choice at a time. One missed invitation. One forgotten phone call. One empty chair. Until one day you wake up and realize you've spent years waiting for someone to remember your value. And that was the moment I finally stopped waiting. The week before Christmas arrived wrapped in ice and silence. Snow covered the neighborhood in thick white layers while blinking lights decorated rooftops all along the street. Every house looked warm from the outside. Mine finally felt calm on the inside. Not happy. Calm. There is a difference. For the first time since my birthday, I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I was preparing for it. On Tuesday morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Ryan. Would you, Vanessa, and Liam like to come over Friday night? There was a pause. Then immediate relief in his voice. Of course, Mom. A real birthday dinner this time. Another pause. A guilty one. That sounds great. In the background, I heard Vanessa asking who he was talking to. His voice lowered after that. We'll be there. The second call was harder. Not because I was nervous. Because it made everything real. Richard Coleman speaking. Richard had handled Walter's estate years earlier. Before that, he and Walter played golf together every spring. He was one of the few people left who remembered Ryan before adulthood complicated him. Richard, it's Helen. A warm chuckle. Helen. Whitmore. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need a favor. By the end of the conversation, he agreed to join us Friday evening. Not as a lawyer. As a witness. There is a difference. Friday arrived cold and bright. I spent most of the day cooking. Pot roast. Mashed potatoes. Homemade rolls. The same menu I had planned for my birthday. The same menu nobody came to eat. As I worked, I found myself smiling occasionally. Not because I expected reconciliation. Because I finally understood something. The purpose of this dinner wasn't to change Ryan or Vanessa. The purpose was to stop hiding from the truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is usually lighter than denial. At 4 o'clock, I opened the refrigerator. One final slice of birthday cake remained. Just one. The frosting had hardened. The edges were dry. Almost 3 weeks old. I stared at it for several seconds. Then carefully placed it on a small plate. Not to serve. To remember. The plate remained beside the sink while I finished preparing dinner. A quiet reminder of why we were all here. Around 6 o'clock, headlights appeared in the driveway. Ryan's SUV. Then Vanessa's. Then another vehicle. A silver sedan. Richard. Ryan frowned immediately when he saw the older man step out carrying a leather briefcase. "Who's that?" he asked while helping Liam remove his coat. "You'll see." Vanessa noticed Richard at the same moment. Her smile tightened. Only slightly. But enough. Wait. She looked toward the driveway. "Is that an attorney?" "Yes." I took Liam's backpack and hung it near the door. Richard handled Walter's affairs for years. The room became noticeably quieter. Dinner began awkwardly. Liam carried most of the conversation. School. Basketball. Christmas presents. Normal childhood things. Everyone else barely touched their food. Ryan kept glancing toward Richard. Vanessa remained composed, but her smile never fully returned. I watched them carefully. For years, I would have felt nervous in a moment like this. Now I felt strangely peaceful. Because once you've accepted the truth, you stop fearing it. After dessert, Liam carried his new science magazine into the living room. The television played softly in the background. The adults remained at the table. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hallway. Outside, snow drifted beneath the porch lights. Inside, nobody spoke. Finally, Richard folded his napkin and cleared his throat. The sound seemed unusually loud. "Mrs. Whitmore asked me to join you this evening because she wanted several matters clarified." Ryan sat up straighter. Vanessa's fingers tightened around her wine glass. I noticed everything. The tension. The uncertainty. The fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing certainty. Richard opened his folder. But unlike what they expected, he did not immediately discuss legal documents. Instead, he looked directly at Ryan. "Your father loved this family very much." The statement caught Ryan off guard. "I know." Richard nodded. He also believed people should remain owners of their own lives for as long as possible. Silence. Ryan lowered his eyes. Vanessa remained perfectly still. Richard turned toward me. "Helen has recently updated several arrangements." There it was. The sentence everyone expected. Yet suddenly it felt less important than before. Because something inside me had changed. 3 weeks ago, this dinner would have been about protecting assets. Now it was about protecting dignity. A much more important thing. Ryan looked at me. "Mom, what exactly is going on?" His voice sounded tired. Not defensive. Tired. For a moment, I considered letting Richard continue. Instead, I spoke. "No, Ryan." Everyone turned toward me. "I think this part should come from me." The room became completely silent. Even the television seemed quieter. I folded my hands calmly. The same way Walter always did when discussing something important. Then I looked directly at my son. Not at Vanessa. Not at Richard. At Ryan. Because he was always the real reason this hurt. "Do you know what the hardest part of my birthday was?" Ryan swallowed. "No. It wasn't the SUV." His expression shifted slightly. "It wasn't the photos." Another shift. "It wasn't even forgetting." I paused. The grandfather clock ticked once. Then again. Then again. "I can forgive forgetting." My voice remained calm. I spent decades forgiving things. Ryan stared at the table. Unable to meet my eyes. "The hardest part," I continued softly, "was realizing nobody noticed I was gone." The sentence landed heavily. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I continued. "You didn't call. You didn't ask." You didn't wonder. My eyes drifted briefly toward the empty dining room chair beside the window. The chair Liam usually preferred. The chair that sat empty on my birthday. Then back to Ryan. You stopped seeing me. The words hurt to say. Because they were true. Ryan looked up immediately. That's not fair. The response came quickly. Almost instinctively. I nodded. Maybe. Then I leaned back slightly. But tell me something. Silence. When was the last time you came here because you missed me? Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The room remained silent. And once again, silence answered more honestly than words. Vanessa finally spoke. Helen, I think you're being a little dramatic. There it was. The first genuinely honest thing she'd said all evening. Not because it was true. Because it revealed what she believed. I looked at her calmly. For years, that sentence would have sent me into apology. Now it simply made me sad. No. I shook my head gently. I'm finally being honest. Then I turned back to Ryan. The only person who truly mattered in that moment. I spent weeks asking myself why Vanessa kept pushing me away. Ryan's face tightened. But eventually I realized I was asking the wrong question. Silence. The real question was why you kept letting it happen. The words settled heavily into the room. This time Ryan didn't look away. He stared directly at me. And for the first time all evening, I saw it. Not guilt. Not embarrassment. Recognition. The painful moment when someone finally sees themselves clearly. His voice came out almost as a whisper. I think. He stopped. Started again. I think I forgot who you were outside of being my mother. The room went completely still. Even Vanessa seemed shocked. I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. Because that was it. That was the entire story. Not the house. Not the brochure. Not the retirement community. Not the birthday. This. Right here. A son realizing he had reduced his mother to a role. And forgotten the person inside it. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Richard quietly closed his folder. Without reading a single document. Without discussing a single legal detail. Because suddenly none of it mattered. The real truth had already been revealed. And it was far more important than any paperwork. After Ryan's words, nobody spoke. Not immediately. The silence that followed felt different from the silences that had come before. This one wasn't avoidance. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't manipulation. It was truth settling into the room. And truth, I've learned, is rarely loud. It simply arrives and refuses to leave. Outside, snow drifted softly beneath the porch lights. Inside, the grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick. 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 For the first time all evening, nobody seemed interested in brochures, retirement communities, or long-term plans. Because the conversation had finally reached the thing it was always about. Us. Ryan looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like a man who had spent years walking around something painful and had suddenly collided with it head-on. He rubbed a hand across his face. I don't know when it happened. His voice sounded distant. Almost confused. I believed him. Because most betrayals inside families aren't planned. They happen gradually. One compromise at a time. One excuse at a time. One silence at a time. Until eventually the damage becomes visible. I used to call every Sunday. Ryan's eyes remained fixed on the table. The statement surprised me. Not because it was incorrect. Because he remembered. I know. A faint smile touched his lips. Dad would have called if I forgot. I almost laughed. He would have shown up at your front door. That earned the smallest smile from Ryan. The kind people wear when remembering someone they still miss. For a moment, Walter sat between us again. Not physically, but emotionally. A bridge connecting two people who had forgotten how to reach each other. Then Ryan looked up. Really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in years. And something changed in his expression. I recognized it immediately. The moment a child stops seeing a parent as a permanent fixture and starts seeing them as a person. A vulnerable person. A finite person. An aging person. A person who can be hurt. His eyes drifted briefly around the room. The family photographs. The dining table. Walter's chair. The familiar walls. The life he had once belonged to. And suddenly I realized something. Ryan wasn't seeing the house. He was seeing time. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. She had been unusually quiet ever since Ryan's admission. Finally she spoke. I think we're making this bigger than it needs to be. The sentence landed poorly. Even she seemed to realize it. Because nobody responded. Not Ryan. Not Richard. Not me. For the first time since I met her, Vanessa found herself outside the center of a conversation. And she clearly didn't like it. Helen. Vanessa forced a smile. If we've hurt your feelings, I'm sorry. There it was. The apology without ownership. The apology people offer when they want discomfort to disappear. Not when they want understanding. Years ago I would have accepted it. Immediately. Gratefully. Now I simply listened. Then I nodded. Thank you. Nothing more. The conversation ended there. Because some apologies deserve acceptance. Not validation. Ryan looked toward her. Then back at me. The conflict in his face became impossible to miss. For years he had balanced two worlds. His wife. His mother. And every time those worlds collided, he chose the path requiring the least resistance. Now he was finally seeing the cost. Not to himself. To me. Eventually Richard stood. Slowly closing his briefcase. I think my work here is done. The statement made me smile. Because technically he hadn't done anything. No documents were signed. No legal announcements were made. No dramatic revelations occurred. And yet the evening felt more significant than any legal meeting ever could. Truth had a way of accomplishing what paperwork couldn't. After Richard left, Ryan offered to help clean up. The gesture surprised me. Not because it was extraordinary. Because it was familiar. Years ago, helping with dishes had been automatic. Somewhere along the way, it stopped. For the next 20 minutes we stood side by side in the kitchen. Just like we used to. No dramatic conversations. No emotional speeches. Just dishes. Running water. The ordinary sounds of family. Sometimes healing begins in surprisingly quiet places. As I rinsed plates, Ryan dried them. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then he broke the silence. Do you remember my 10th birthday? I froze. Only slightly. The question caught me off guard. Because I had been thinking about that birthday for weeks. The superhero party? He nodded. A faint smile appeared. You made my cape. I laughed softly. It took forever. You stayed up all night. I was younger then. Ryan looked down at the dish towel in his hands. No. His voice grew quieter. You loved me. The words hit harder than he intended. Because love had never been the issue. Recognition was. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Ryan continued. I remember being upset because Jimmy Harrison got a bigger cake than I did. I laughed. You were very upset. I was a brat. Occasionally. He smiled. Then the smile disappeared. I never thought about what that party cost you. There it was. Not money. Not effort. Awareness. The thing missing all along. I remember Dad telling me you spent weeks planning it. Ryan stared at the counter. I remember being disappointed over the size of the action figures. His voice cracked slightly. And then I forgot your birthday. The sentence hung between us. Painful. Honest. Impossible to soften. I placed a plate into the drying rack. Then looked at my son. Not the 40-year-old man standing in front of me. The little boy underneath him. The one Walter used to carry on his shoulders. The one who waited by the window for me to come home. The one who called every Sunday. He wasn't gone. That was the strange realization. He wasn't gone. He was buried. Under distractions. Responsibilities. Comfort. Avoidance. But not gone. I'm not angry because you forgot one birthday. Ryan looked at me. Then listened. Really listened. I'm hurt because somewhere along the way, forgetting became possible. His eyes filled immediately. Not dramatically. Just enough. The way grown men cry when they don't want anyone to notice. And in that moment, I knew he understood. Maybe not everything. But enough. Around 9:30, they finally prepared to leave. Liam hugged me twice. The second hug seemed unnecessary. Which made it perfect. Children often express love without realizing they're doing it. I held him tightly. Longer than usual. Then watched him climb into the SUV. Ryan lingered beside the front door. Snowflakes drifted through the porch light between us. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, I'm sorry. Simple. No excuses. No explanations. No blame. Just sorry. And somehow that made it worth more than every speech he could have given. After they drove away, I stood alone at the front window. The neighborhood had grown quiet again. Christmas lights glowed softly across the street. The world looked peaceful. Inside, the house felt different. Not fixed. Not healed. Different. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't wondering whether Ryan understood. He did. The harder question now was whether understanding would change anything. And that answer would take longer. Much longer. But as I turned away from the window, I realized something surprising. For the first time since my 65th birthday, I felt hopeful. Not because my son apologized. Because I finally stopped pretending I didn't deserve one. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. Sunlight reflected sharply off the snowbanks lining the street while church bells echoed faintly across the neighborhood. For the first time in years, I did not host breakfast. I did not wake before dawn to bake cinnamon rolls. I did not rush around wrapping extra gifts because someone forgot batteries or needed tape at the last minute. I did not spend the morning waiting for everyone else. Instead, I made coffee slowly and carried it into the living room. The Christmas tree glowed softly in the corner. White lights reflected against the window glass. Walter always preferred white lights. Colored ones look like a carnival, he used to say. I disagreed. Every year. And every year I let him win. I smiled at the memory. Funny how the arguments you miss most are usually the smallest ones. The house felt quiet. But no longer empty. There was a difference. 3 weeks earlier, silence had felt like abandonment. Now it felt like peace. Not complete peace. Not permanent peace. Just enough. The kind that arrives after you stop fighting reality. I settled into Walter's chair and watched the tree lights flicker. Outside, children laughed somewhere down the block. A dog barked. A car door slammed. Ordinary Christmas sounds. Life continuing. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Liam. Grandma. His excitement burst through the speaker immediately. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Merry Christmas. A pause. Then, Dad wants to know if we can come over. The wording made me smile. If we can come over. Not if I'm available to babysit. Not if I can help. Just visit. Such a small difference. Such a meaningful one. I would love that. They arrived shortly after noon. The atmosphere felt different from the moment they entered. Not dramatic. Subtle. The way weather changes before you consciously notice it. Liam raced toward the tree carrying a new model airplane. Vanessa followed behind him. Polite. Quiet. Almost cautious. Ryan entered last. Holding a small bakery box. The sight immediately caught my attention. He noticed. Of course he did. I brought dessert. His voice carried a hint of embarrassment. I looked at the box. Then at him. A cake? A faint smile appeared. Felt appropriate. For a moment neither of us moved. Then we both laughed. Not because it was particularly funny. Because we understood what it meant. The afternoon passed gently. Liam showed me every gift he received. Every single one. Children never summarize. Thank God. Some stories deserve details. The living room filled with wrapping paper, laughter, and the occasional argument about instruction manuals. Normal family noise. The sort of noise I had spent weeks missing. At one point, I found myself standing in the kitchen beside Vanessa. Alone. A situation that once would have made me uncomfortable. She stood quietly drying dishes. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. Helen. I looked up. She hesitated. Actually hesitated. Not strategically. Not performatively. Genuinely. I think I've spent years trying to organize everything. The admission caught me off guard. She stared down at the dish towel. I always thought I was helping. I remained silent. Not because I was angry. Because I wanted her to continue. When my father died, everything fell apart. Her voice softened. We weren't prepared. I listened. For the first time in a very long time. Not to her explanations. To her. The person underneath them. I promised myself that would never happen again. She folded the towel carefully. But somewhere along the way, I started treating people like problems that needed solutions. The kitchen grew quiet. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then I nodded. That happens more often than people realize. It wasn't forgiveness. Not exactly. But it was understanding. And sometimes understanding is the first step towards something better. Later that afternoon, Ryan lingered behind while Liam assembled his airplane. The familiar awkwardness returned. Not hostile. Just unfinished. Healing rarely happens all at once. He leaned against the kitchen counter. Mom? Yes? I found something last week. My curiosity immediately sharpened. What? Ryan reached into his coat pocket. A photograph. Old. Slightly faded. He handed it to me. I stared at it for several seconds. Then my throat tightened. The superhero birthday party. His 10th birthday. The one I'd thought about so many times recently. Ryan stood in the center wearing the homemade cape I'd sewn. Chocolate frosting covered his face. Walter stood behind him laughing. And there I was. Holding the cake. Smiling. Young. Tired. Happy. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I found it in Dad's things. Ryan sat down across from me. He kept it. Of course he did. Walter kept everything that mattered. Sometimes things that didn't matter too. But mostly things that mattered. I traced the edge of the photograph with my thumb. He loved that party. Ryan laughed softly. I complained the whole day. Yes, you did. I was terrible. You were 10. A silence followed. Comfortable this time. Then Ryan looked directly at me. I don't want to forget again. The sentence sounded simple. But it carried enormous weight. Not because of birthdays. Because of everything underneath them. I studied my son carefully. The lines around his eyes. The exhaustion. The sincerity. And for the first time in a long while, I believed him. Not because people change overnight. Because awareness had finally arrived. Real awareness. The kind that cannot easily be ignored once seen. After they left that evening, the house became quiet once more. Christmas lights glowed softly against the windows. Snow drifted through the darkness outside. I carried my coffee into the kitchen. Then stopped. The refrigerator stood in front of me. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Then I opened the door. At the very back sat something wrapped carefully in plastic. The final piece. The last remaining slice of birthday cake. I had forgotten it was there. Or perhaps I hadn't. Perhaps some part of me had been saving it. Waiting. Holding on to it the same way I held on to disappointment. The same way I held on to hope. The same way I held on to old versions of people. I lifted the plate. Removed the plastic wrap. The frosting had hardened completely. The cake looked small now. Ordinary. No longer powerful. No longer symbolic. Just cake. I carried it to the trash can. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I smiled. Not sadly. Not bitterly. Just peacefully. And I threw it away. Not because the hurt had disappeared. Some hurts never completely disappear. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. Families are complicated. People are complicated. Change takes time. No. I threw it away because I was no longer waiting beside it. Later that night, I stood at the front window. Snowflakes drifted beneath the streetlights. Walter's old pickup remained parked beside the garage exactly where he left it years ago. Across town, Ryan was probably driving home in the SUV that had once symbolized one of the worst nights of my life. Funny how objects change when people change. Or perhaps when we do. I thought about Walter. About Ryan. About Liam. About all the imperfect people who made up my imperfect family. Then I thought about something Ryan said. I think I forgot who you were outside of being my mother. For weeks, I believed that was the tragedy. Now I understood something else. The greater tragedy would have been if I had forgotten who I was too. I switched off the living room lights and headed upstairs. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs. Home. Not because of property values. Not because of inheritance. Not because of memories. Because it was the place where my life had happened. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to decide what that life was worth. I already knew. And somehow, that was enough.